Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hey, everybody. It's Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers. I always say I'm thrilled or I'm excited or something like that, but I'm actually really gratified. Cris Beswick is one of those individuals that you see speaking at all of the top innovation conferences. And it's the result of years and years of grinding away in this space, trying to figure out what all of my lovely listeners, you innovators, are doing right and doing wrong and what gets in your way and how he can help. And so Cris has spent over a decade as a successful entrepreneur and CEO. Cris is now a strategic advisor on innovation and recognized globally as a thought leader on innovation leadership and the culture around that innovation, as well as measuring innovation maturity. He's the co-founder of the boutique innovation consulting firm Outcome and co-author of Building a Culture of Innovation, an Amazon bestseller, and voted one of CMI's top books on innovation in 2017. He specializes in working with CEOs and senior teams and has advised some of the world's most successful companies while delivering keynotes at conferences to audiences around the world on how to become exceptional by building and leading a culture of innovation. So, Cris, thank you so much for joining me today. I would so much rather be doing this, from a green room at one of the conferences that we speak at together.
Yeah.
Grateful.
Or on stage in Paris, where we last got together. Yeah,
that's right.
Years ago.
That's right. And Innovators. Yeah, that was fantastic. Well, I'm grateful to have you on the show. So let's dive in, because you and I live and breathe for this stuff, but none of us got here by majoring in innovation back in the day. That was simply not something that existed for either of us. So how did you actually get into innovation? Where did that come from?
Wow. So I've had two. I would say I've had two bites at the cherry, right? To use that phrase. So I spent.
Wait, what is that phrase?
Well, the two bites at the cherry means like you've done one thing and then you've got a second chance at doing something else, right?
Two bangs at the cherry. Did I just
two bites of the cherry? Yeah.
2 bites.
So it's a phrase that says, look, I've had two really great opportunities, but they're linked, and I didn't know how much they would be linked. So I spent a decade in the design consulting industry, and I built a group of companies in the early 2000s up to 2008. And I won't go into the detail, but I was completely burnt out. So I'd gone from being a designer and like all of the things we talk about now, human centricity, design thinking, all of that was my bread and butter. That's part of my DNA. And I'd gone through all that, and then I became a CEO. So I ended up behind a desk, running a group of companies, having to employ people, worrying about whether people can pay the mortgage and salary bills and all of those things. And like most of the leaders that I coach now, I absolutely fell out of love with that. That wasn't what I entered as an entrepreneur, starting and building, one company, then another. That wasn't what I really wanted to do. So at the end of 2007, look, we were super successful. We won awards all over the world. We were doing amazing work with global brands like Nokia and M&S and B&Q and people like that. In December 2007, I just thought, I'm just not enjoying this. Like, the money was great. We had a brilliant team, all of the trappings of success, but I just wasn't enjoying it. So it took me about 9 months to basically sell the whole. So the deal took about 9 months to negotiate with the lawyers and the people buying the whole group. And I sold with the lawyers. I signed a complete exit on September the 9th, 2008. And Lehman Brothers crashed on September the 15th. Wow. So 6 days, right? And I genuinely, I wouldn't be here now because I would have taken a completely different path. That deal wouldn't have gone ahead, and I'd have ended up doing different things. So that was 2008. And then I took a bit of time out and I thought, well, what does Cris want to do now, given, he'd fallen out of love with being a CEO and all the hassle, the stress. And it can be brilliant, but it's balanced with, it can be incredibly stressful. And I started to get asked by some of those old clients they basically said, look, innovation's starting to hit the boardroom, the whole subject, etc. Could you come and talk to us about design and innovation and how we solve problems? But could you come and talk to us about how we can do it, rather than, you spent a decade bringing your team in and solving problems for us? Could you come and help us try and build that capability ourselves? And that was sort of 2010, 2011. And it snowballed from there. Two books later, a global consulting firm, which I run with, many of the listeners will know Dan Tomer, who wrote The Corporate Startup. So Dan and I run a global firm called Out, and all of those things.
And the author of Innovation Accounting now.
Innovation Accounting now.
Yeah, we had him on to talk about that new book too.
Yeah. So, and Dan and I were on a call about half an hour ago talking about the next book and other stuff. So there's loads and loads of stuff happening because our, to your point earlier, our thinking on this subject just evolves on a daily basis. We come up with new frameworks, we come up with new approaches, and it's constantly evolving. And then we test those new thoughts and those new things with live clients, and using the innovation process, we iterate them, we develop them, and we're coming up with new stuff all the time, new approaches based out of experience of testing and validating new thinking with clients. So yeah, that's how I got here. But think about all of those things as a designer: design thinking, empathy, human centricity, all of those tools. The second bite of the cherry, which is that phrase, is I never thought a decade on from leaving that design industry that all of the foundational, the DNA of being a designer is now right at the heart of what we're trying to put into organizations. Human-centered, empathy in terms of leadership, all of those things are front and center in what organizations need to put in place now. So all of that background has come right back round again, and it is serving me really well.
Well, so I think, some of the things that you and I were talking about prior to hitting record were two things. One is, the challenge of getting an innovation through the corporate meat grinder is not for the faint of heart. No. It is not for people who demand results yesterday. And it is not for people who demand the ongoing success of the status quo in order to reach that innovation breakthrough.
Yeah.
And the desire for innovation and the desire to keep things steady and reliable, both for employees, for culture, and for growth, is that push-pull that's always happening within a corporation. And how does this work? Let's start with an example, Cris, of an innovation, that you've worked on. Tell us that kind of beginning, middle, and end, like this way that a company says, we need help getting this innovation through. What do we need to be thinking about? And for my listeners who are largely anyone with innovation in their title and probably product in their title or user experience or customer experience, let's talk about, a product that, had some challenges in getting from idea inception or prototype all the way to its logical finish line, whatever that may be. And that finish line might be failure.
Yeah. So we don't work specifically on products, on solutions. Mm-hmm. What we build and what we help clients build is the capability for them to deliver that themselves. So, but to answer the question about the things that get in the way, there's a whole host of them, right? And I think the first is, for people listening who have innovation in their title, who know that there's better ways of doing things, they know there's better solutions, but the organization is completely resistant to them. We hear that so often. The challenge is there's no easy solution to an organization where the senior team are more concerned about the status quo and what we call constantly refurbishing what exists as opposed to designing something completely new. There's often questions, well, how do I convince the senior team that we should look at innovation? It's not that simple. But we still have the same challenges in organizations where we see senior teams who absolutely understand the value of innovation. It's a demonstrable part of their strategy. And we still see challenges in the form of the challenge of how leaders make their organizations ambidextrous, i.e., to your point, how do we keep the wheels turning? Because that's what pays for things. Customers still have to be served with products and experiences, etc. The reality is shareholders still have to get some kind of returns. The business still has to function and be profitable. But in parallel, how do we build the ability to shape the future, to create new things, to evolve, and etc., etc. And those challenges, I think, will always exist. What we spoke about before you hit record was one of the observations that we've had over the past several years, which every client that we speak to now says, that's exactly where we are. That's exactly what the problem is. And the challenge is, and many of your listeners will be in this group, I think the challenge is in the middle of organizations. And the challenge is around middle management. But the challenge isn't with middle management. It's not middle management and the lack of innovation isn't their fault. I think our observation and what we've noticed is the pressure is being put on the middle of organizations, and then they're wrongly labeled the frozen middle or the permafrost. And the reality is, my observation is almost all of the middle management teams that I've worked with, they are frozen and they are shackled by the system that they're being asked to work inside of. And that system is predicated to maintain that status quo that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And it has no component to it that allows any flexibility to explore and shape the future and create and find new things. Yet the narrative from the senior team, from the board or the leadership is, we want those new things, we want new products, we want growth, we need creativity, we need new solutions and business models. So there's this real tension in organizations where what the organization asks for, it's not creating the conditions for, or it's not creating the system for those things to be able to be produced.
So let's talk about what are those components that need to be there in order for middle managers to thrive, because that messy middle is often thrown up as the excuse why we're not innovating, or we're not innovating fast enough, or what have you. It's blame the middle manager.
Absolutely. And in many cases, my observation and experience is demonstrably wrongly labeled that. So if you look at when we talk about, let me unpack the system. When I talk about the innovation system, what we talk about there is 5 core components: strategy, processes, leadership and management, culture, and then governance. So if you look at those 5 core components, and anyone that's read The Corporate Startup or my book or any of the books that Dan and I have written, you'll notice that will resonate with people, because it's that those themes are throughout the books. Without all of those things properly being in place, it's really difficult for an organization to drive innovation. What we typically see, I'll use this phrase, leaders want what innovation delivers, but very rarely do what innovation takes. And what I mean by that is they don't redesign the current system specifically to allow innovation to thrive, and specifically to allow middle managers to what we call drive innovation on a daily basis. And those things are, I broadly break them down into 3 things. 1, physical assets. So strategy, clarity on vision, clarity on, an innovation thesis. You will be surprised how many corporates we go into who don't have a thesis.
What is that? So our listeners know?
Yeah, so the innovation thesis is something It's a fundamental part of Dan's first book, which is The Corporate Startup. So the innovation thesis is basically the guiding document to your innovation strategy, which says, here's what the organization will focus on. Here's what it knows it should focus on. Problem spaces, technology, business models, so different criteria, and a whole host of things that say we should focus on this, we should focus on that. The antithesis is then the guiding part of that, the yin and yang of that then says, and here's what we don't want to focus on at the moment. So we're not interested in these kind of business models. We're not interested in this technology. We're not interested in these problem spaces or these challenges or these product areas. Now, it's important to know that the thesis and the antithesis aren't just direct opposites of each other. Their content will be very different. The amount of organizations that don't even have that in place, but there's then a mandate from the senior team to say, we want innovation, we want growth, we want new stuff. So you get, in many cases, random, low value ideas that aren't aligned to the strategy of the organization. So you get a huge amount of wasted time. But that organization may very well give the middle of the organization the flexibility and the autonomy to just go and do stuff. But stuff that isn't aligned and stuff that ultimately makes its way up the food chain, only for the senior team to say, well, we're not really interested in those business models, or no, we're not, that problem space isn't on our radar at the moment. So the whole approach to innovation becomes, there's no tactical play, there's no strategy, there's no governance, there's no structure around it. It becomes really random and chaotic. And the middle of the organization is then blamed for that. You're not bringing us ideas, you've not driven growth, you've not come up with any new stuff. So things like that as an asset need to be in place. The funding needs to be in place, et cetera, et cetera. And then you need things like mindset. So what's the mindset of the senior team when it comes to innovation? And we talk about ownership. At senior level, for me, leaders should own the innovation agenda. What does ownership really, really look like when you unpack that? So as a senior leader, do I really own the innovation agenda? And is it absolutely obvious across the organization that I own it and I sponsor it? And if that's not there, it makes it very, very difficult for people in the middle of the organization to understand what they're able to do, what they're allowed to do, and what they should do.
Yeah. So break this down for us so it becomes a little bit more tangible for us, because I think we can get lost in the hypothesis, right? Or our thesis rather around innovation. But when it comes to actually empowering the messy middle, right, to actually do these things, what do we need to give them? What's an example you can think about with some of the clients that you've worked with and how this works well?
Yeah, so if you take someone like, so we've worked with loads of banks, we've worked with most of the top 5 pharma companies around the world, several of the world's biggest banks. If you take something like, take ING, for example. ING, if you talk to other banks, ING are considered by many of the other banks to be really mature when it comes to innovation. And if you look at the middle of the organization, that middle management layer throughout ING, they've been given absolutely everything. So all of them are clear on what their current level of innovation maturity is, which is really important, i.e. so ING is split up into business units, but a business unit in essence is a country. Every country and every manager across ING knows what each country's innovation maturity score is. They know where they've scored really well, whether it's around strategy, whether it's on leading for innovation, whether it's on processes or culture or how innovation is managed. So take the management layer, for example. They've all got their scores on how well their people have said they manage, the management team bring innovation alive on a daily basis. Now, that allows those managers and their leaders to say, right, we don't demonstrate the right behaviors for innovation. Our people have fed back that we don't bring those behaviors alive on a daily basis. And we're not modeling the right behavior. Informed with that insight, with that data, they can then start to tackle those really granular, very specific problems. So all of the management team have been given that data.
Okay.
All of the management team are then given what we designed this with the Chief Innovation Office, but they're all given what's called given access to what we've called the Next Steps program. And the Next Steps program is a clear framework that every manager in the organization has access to, where they can say, out of all of the core components that ING requires us to be able to do in terms of driving innovation, so governance, leadership, culture, each one of those pillars has multiple components. Wherever we've scored, there's a clear guidance, there's a clear framework for what we need to do and what we need to work on next in order to get better or solve that particular question. Now, this has all been designed specifically for managers across the business, and every one of them has access to it. Now, think about that in comparison with an organization that aspires to want to innovate, but nothing anywhere near as robust has been given to that middle management layer to really empower them and enable them to understand where things are going well and where things aren't, but then also be given potential solutions and suggestions and access to frameworks and tools that the Next Step methodology gives them in order that they can autonomously, themselves go, right, here's where our team have scored. Here's the question that we didn't score too well on. Here's the guidance for how to tackle that problem and how to answer that particular question better, whether it be around modeling the right behavior, increasing psychological safety, making more time and resources available for innovation, whatever it is, whatever the component is, they have a methodological approach to solving all of those really granular questions. And
Cris,
that's something really robust that ING has as an example.
Yeah, but I mean, it goes beyond, right? I mean, it's not just that we're giving tools and frameworks and things like that, because the psychological support inside of an organization that's never really done this kind of work before, that's suddenly empowering middle managers and say, guess what? I'm not going to be able to have my foot on the accelerator the whole time to meet my quarterly numbers. I'm going to need more engineering time. So my guys are going to be working at 120%. Because it is what it is while we're figuring out whether or not we should pour an investment into this. And man does not live by paycheck alone. He lives by incentives.
Absolutely.
And so, the shift in not just like, here's a brand new toolbox and frameworks, have at it. Talk a little bit about the psychological safety net and the motivation for me as a middle manager. I'm already burnt out. Like I want to do the right thing, but help make it interesting to me.
So one of the key things is not expecting people to do 120%. So backfilling that headcount in many organizations is absolutely required, but is never done because it's never linked to innovation. Where you have companies like ING, or if anyone's listened to Dan talk about D&B, organizations like that, it's another bank, or even companies like Roche, who we've done a lot of work with. They understand that your part of your strategy has to be the creation of time, energy, and resources. What we can't do is expect innovation to come because people give that 20% over 100 in order to give the business what it needs. Right. So part of that overall strategy, part of what a leadership role is about, is saying, I can't expect my management team to do 120%. I need to create an ecosystem where I reduce them to 80%. So the 20% they want to focus on is still within their capability to do it. I don't want to push people over 100%. So
and Google's been doing this forever, right?
Sure.
Google's been saying philanthropic work.
Yeah. Right. All of that. So the irony is the lessons are there from organizations that have mastered this, right? Now, that doesn't make it very, very easy for organizations to do. What you then have to do is you have to equate that, because every senior team is going to go, well, that's great, guys, but that 20% headcount is going to cost us an extra 50,000 euros a year, right? But that's part of your investment in innovation. What we can't expect is that we push people to 120%, 20%, and we still get what we get, but it's not cost us anything. So
Yeah, and watch
part of
the
the
exit
whole
when you don't.
and watch those brilliant entrepreneurs migrate to become entrepreneurs in the banking industry, because that little app that they wanted to create suddenly becomes the next Starling or Metro Bank or whoever, because
Right.
they've exited and
Right.
taken that with them, right? So understanding that part of your whole approach to innovation is how you create the time, energy, and resources to allow people to drive and contribute to innovation is part of that strategy. And it may very well require headcount or backfilling to give people that 10%, 20%, whatever time they need. You've got to, as a leader, you've got to provide that resource.
And the other thing I think you need to provide, correct me if I'm wrong, but is the shift in culture, where a middle manager is judged on getting from point A to point B, like most of us are, in order to enable a bigger process. But the heart of innovation is frequent failure.
Yeah.
And so shifting the mindset both of the middle manager and of the organization to say, didn't work.
Yeah.
I've just sent my 20%, my 50K, and now it's dead.
Yeah. But look, you've got classic examples of what Satya Nadella has done at Microsoft with changing that whole culture and like properly embedded, it's not fully embedded yet if you talk to people from there, but well on the way to embedding growth mindset, to embedding the fact that shift from maintaining today to creating tomorrow, that shift to be more curious, to want to experiment, and with experimentation comes a bit of exploration and the knowledge that you might not find what you set out to find. So you may make mistakes, or you may take some risk, but what we have to do as part of that, and this blends into the psychological safety component, is we shift from risk or failure to learning, right? And Satya Nadella talks about that shift to a learning organization, and that learning, the narrative around risk and failure shifts towards learning. So the organization it still fails, but in the new narrative, that failure has value as opposed to the failure being negative. The risk that we take is what we call smart risk, not cavalier risk. So yes, you're trying to test hypotheses, but you're validating things almost on an incremental level. You're validating things as best as possible so that you can cut things as fast as possible. So the whole fail fast, fail cheap language that people know, the whole innovation process, when done well, is designed to help you do that. So yes, you may fail in one sense, or in our language, you just cut a project. You haven't failed. What you've done is you've cut it. You've stemmed the blood flow, or you've stemmed the flow of time, resources, and money. But what you get out of it is huge amounts of knowledge and learning about what didn't work so that you can do something different next time. It's a mindset shift.
And the other part is that guy doesn't get fired. That guy doesn't lose his annual
or
pay.
chastised
or chastised, or, in his peer group is suddenly seen as, oh, well, that guy took a risk and it didn't work. And I'm not.
So when we talk about, in the coaching that I do with leaders, I talk about that as social risk. So socially, i.e. in the social sphere of our team or our department or our business unit, what's the social risk that I am exposing myself to if I step out of the status quo, if I challenge a leader, if I try something and it fails, if I blow 10K, what's the social risk? And all of those things have to be managed and have to be explicitly clear that no one's going to get fired. No one's going to be chastised. There's not going to be any, public flogging of that person in front of the team. All of those. No one designs an organization, says, I'm going to put that public humiliation at the center of whenever anyone does anything wrong. They don't design those.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that?
I'm an eternal optimist, right? But historically, I don't think anyone has physically sat down as a leader and designed that in. But different
I don't know.
leaders.
I mean, I might think about GE in the, in the early 2000s where, if you're on the bottom 25%, you're out. That was by design.
Well, yeah. So yeah, no, and GE were a client of ours, 2000s. Yeah, I know GE very well. So yes, the bottom, like the bottom 5%, the bottom 10%. Cisco had the same sort of, the unspoken rule was, the bottom 10%. All of those things. What I mean is that, getting your termination letter in an envelope is very different than that public humiliation in front of 30 of your colleagues, right? What we're doing is we're designing out, when we look at organizational design and design around innovation, we're designing out any possibility that ever happens. And we have to do that through leadership coaching and high-end executive education, i.e., executive coaching and development. Now, with the understanding that empathy and human centricity and psychological safety and all of those things are core tenets of what it means to, the phrase we use is lead for innovation. So I'm not particularly keen on the play on words around, becoming an innovation leader, because that creates the connotation that you as a leader need to be an innovator, which isn't the case. But leading for innovation, when you consider innovation as an outcome that organizations want, being taught how to lead for innovation is the right way to phrase it, I think. And empathy, human-centered approaches, psychological safety, all of those things are core ingredients of what I would talk about when I'm saying leading for innovation.
Well, Cris, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to put you on a bit of the hot seat, as I do with all of my guests who are on the podcast. So it's not so hot, I promise.
Well, it's warm, a warm seat.
A warm seat. It's thinking a little bit. So, in your mind, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Oh, wow. The greatest thing.
Whatever it may be. Maybe it's a process. I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but you decide. Maybe even give us your top three if you like. Greatest.
Do you know what? I used to use an example of this in keynotes. I haven't used it for a long time. If we're talking about a product, right? Let's talk about a product. I think one of the best things, and this is me as an ex-designer, right? One of the best things that I've ever seen is a product called Life Straw. I don't know that you've seen Life Straw. So someone can Google this. So, post this session, people can sort of metaphorically, they can correct me if I'm wrong. But as I remember, Life Straw was created by either a Finnish or a Danish startup somewhere in Europe somewhere. And it was basically, it's nothing more than design at its most simple. But when design is simple, it's when it's at its most beautiful. And Life Straw is basically a plastic tube, and it's filled with loads of like stones and carbon blocks and filters and things like that. It's super cheap. It's like 50 cents a straw or something. And it was designed to combat the issue in Africa around safe drinking water. This super simple little straw, you can literally just go to the dirtiest pond ever, and it filters 99% of waterborne bacteria. Now, where design really changes the world and really shapes the future is where the simplest bit of design, the simplest innovation has the potential to save life and combat such a massive systemic, like massive challenge as safe drinking water for kids. If we boil it down to the most vulnerable. And Life Straw, it's a product you don't really hear about anymore. And there may be new things that have come out, but this was like 7 or 8 years ago. And for me as a product, as a bit of innovation, something which is so tiny, so simple and so cheap, yet has the ability to impact something on a huge scale. That's pure innovation for me. That's where innovation is at its best.
Fantastic. And if you could join any innovation team in history, which team would you join?
Do you know what? If I could wave a magic wand, I would. I'll give you two. I'd I join IDEO tomorrow and I would give my right arm to build innovation culture across Vayner Media, so Gary Vaynerchuk's companies, only because of the woman who heads up HR there, Claude Silver. If you can get her on your podcast, I would literally give my right arm to work with her. I think her take on how you build the hard and the soft side of culture across an organization is absolutely marvelous. Not many people know about her as an individual, but her take on culture and leadership and how we empower people and all of those things it's marvelous.
Fantastic. We'll have to keep an eye out for her.
Yeah.
And anything that you would love to see innovated or invented that isn't here yet. So what is the innovation that you would love to see in the world that's not here? Something that makes you absolutely crazy or that you crave, or, a problem that you desperately would like to see solved? What is that?
That's a good one. Wow. This is definitely shifted from the warm seat to the hot seat. Do you know what? I'll probably stick on, look, we've got macro challenges, right? Everyone listening knows we've got challenges around decarbonisation and the planet and all that kind of stuff. But I think anything that along the lines of LifeStraw, so anything that the Bill and Gates Foundation are doing, anything like, there's never going to be a silver bullet to poverty or safe drinking water or anything like that. But anything from an innovation perspective that could even remotely start to tackle hunger, safe drinking water, poverty, anything like that, because those are the things that tend to get ignored in favor of the next new iPhone or, Tesla making super fast battery powered cars and things like that. They're all the super sexy stuff, but the stuff that really impacts lives and things are the LifeStraw things, and drinking water and poverty and access to clean water and food and things like that. So anything that the Gates Foundation is doing, innovation in that space, I think is disproportionately important.
Yeah. I was talking with a corporate leader who told me that Walmart throws away more food per year than Chipotle buys and makes.
Wow. Do you know what? It's really, I only caught about 10 minutes of this program on British TV last night. And it was a program about wasted food.
Yeah.
And I literally only caught like a few minutes. And there's an organization, I can't remember their name. There's an organization in the UK that every day they collect food from all of the supermarkets in their area. So let's say in a city or wherever. And every day they get something like, this is just bread, right? Just loaves of bread. They get something like 8 van loads of bread. Every day, that like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of loaves of bread that the supermarkets are just going to throw in a skip at the end of the day. Now, yes, we've got best before dates and use by dates and all that, but a visual check on whether something's good, safe to eat or not is all it needs. And when you've got people on the street or people going hungry, or you've got low-income families having to access food banks because they can't buy food. And then you've got the supermarket, which could be 1 mile down the road from that family, throwing skipfuls of food out every night. There's just an imbalance somewhere. And that's something we need to tackle.
Amen. Well, Cris, thank you so much for joining me on Innovation Storytellers today. If people want to get in touch with you and Outcome, how can they best do that?
So the easiest thing is I'm super easy to find on LinkedIn. It's Cris Beswick. There's no H in Chris. So CrisBeswick. You can email me, chris@chrisbeswick.com. Find me on LinkedIn. Outcome. Look at the work that Dan and I are doing at Outcome. The website is weareoutcome.co. Yeah, I'm not difficult to find.
Fantastic, Cris. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan.
Did you know that stories are 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts alone? And because of that, leaders have told us that the way we teach storytelling could save them upwards of $100 million. Prioritizing innovation storytelling has never made more sense. And it's why becoming an innovation storyteller is so critical. Don't wait to discover how high the stakes really are. At Innovation Storytellers, our mission is to help you align others around your ideas for change by harnessing the power of strategic communications and inviting people to step into a better future. Visit our website today at innovationstorytellers.com, and we'll teach you the storytelling skills your organization needs to grow, thrive, and create a future that's worthy of all of us. That's innovationstorytellers.com. I can't wait to hear from you.